Charlie Roumeliotis, what's up, man? How you doing?
What's going on, man? Long time no talk.
Oh yeah, man. It's been a year already, which is crazy. But lots of things obviously going on in hockey and the Blackhawks. But what you been up to this summer? Just trying to get away from it a little bit for a couple weeks or so.
Yeah, it's been I feel like every summer I try to just mentally decompress, but there's always stuff going on. Just like this job is it's either 100 miles per hour or it's zero.
Yeah.
Like it's really hard to have like an in between. So every summer I try to get as zero or close to zero as possible. Obviously on my PTO time I can really unplug, but sometimes you find yourself just thinking you're going out on the golf course on a Monday and then something happens and it's, you got to rush home to take care of it. So that can be a little bit exhausting, but comes with the territory. No complaints on my end, but yeah, it is nice that we are kind of finally in like a really quiet period of the off season where I can shut my brain off a little bit before we ramp back up in September.
Yeah, it goes so fast. I'm just doing this for fun. Like I write about the Blue Jackets for First Ohio Battery, and I was so just tired of last season. And I mean, both the Blackhawks and Blue Jackets were in a similar place in terms of bottom of the standings, just trying to get through the grind and just the ugliness of the on ice product. And I was just so ready just from a hobby perspective. So I was curious. I mean, you're doing this for, obviously it's your full-time job. So on the one hand, you probably have maybe one of the best jobs that you can have in terms of covering a hockey team. But obviously the team has been going through a lot of turmoil and ugliness off the ice and on the ice. So you're covering the Blackhawks, but still, I mean, it's more fun when they're competitive and winning, right?
Definitely. I'll say this though. I think 2 seasons ago was significantly harder than last season. And I'm not really talking about the off ice stuff that we had to cover. It was more so the Hawks went into that season where they traded for Seth Jones. They acquired Marc-Andre Fleury, Tyler Johnson. They made all these moves and with the goal of making the playoffs. And the first month of the season, they fired Jeremy Colleton because they had like one win in the month of October. And so that was actually more grueling than last season, where the expectation was they are going to be bad. They're supposed to be bad. And it's okay that they're going to be bad because that's going to be part of the rebuild. So it was almost like the wins and losses were so secondary last season that like fans didn't even care about the wins and losses. It became, how's Lucas Reichel developing? How are the young defensemen? There's a new coach, Luke Richardson. All those storylines became like it was easy for me to walk inside the locker room and feel a little loose because the wins and loss didn't matter. Whereas 2 years ago, by November, it was like, how do we keep spinning that this team is still trying to make the playoffs? So I feel like that actually might be where Columbus was the last season, where they had high expectations, maybe not Stanley Cup aspirations, but playoff contenders, and they weren't even close to that. That is actually really exhausting of a team to cover, as opposed to like knowing you're covering a rebuilding team and it's supposed to be bad and it's okay that it's bad.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, it's hard to come up with a storyline that's not like the same thing. And you can only write so much about how bad something is and what can we do to fix this and what could they do differently? What could they change? So I can understand more so from a professional, trying to do this as your job and try to figure out storylines or whatever probably is pretty challenging.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I remember 2 years ago when the during that year where they had Fleury and Seth Jones. I mean, well, Seth Jones is still on the team, but like during that year where they had those guys, it was like December. And I remember Patrick Kane sitting at his stall, and maybe it might have been January or whatever. And he was like, if we could just rip together some wins, like get on a run. And it's like, they're like 20 points out of a playoff spot.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to write this that the Hawks are still remaining hopeful, but it's not realistic, So it's just like, it was exhausting to kind of like to pull some storylines out of that. But yeah, it's going to be, and I think it might be that way again this season, but the exciting part is that they have Connor Bedard. And so it's going to be, the Blackhawks immediately become watchable again, no matter if they lose 5-3 every night. Bedard might have 2-3 points. He might score a goal, and it's like, man, the future is coming, because this kid is makes the Blackhawks entertainment.
Yeah,
they're entertaining.
Exactly. I mean, you have the Connor Bedard buzz, the excitement. What was your reaction on lottery night when they're going down all the lists of teams? And I mean, I don't have to tell you the reaction from the Columbus perspective when Kevin Weeks accidentally, or I mean, I think he did legitimately accidentally slip it because there was whatever on the behind the scenes with that whole production side of it. But they're all of a sudden just like in Columbus falls, it's down to Chicago and Anaheim. So, I mean, what was your reaction when the Hawks did win that lottery?
Yeah, so poor Kevin Weeks, he got a lot of flack for it, but it really was not his mistake.
Right.
Like I think they like on the teleprompter or whatever, it had read this and then go to break. So it definitely felt like a behind the scenes issue. I digress.
Yeah.
So on lottery night, I was in studio for NBC Sports Chicago, and we were going to do a show. I think our show was from I think the lottery was from 6 to 6:30, and we had a lottery show at 6:30. So right when the lottery ended, the lottery show ended, we were supposed to go on the air. Well, of course, my other duties also include writing something for the website. So going into the day, I basically pre-wrote 5 stories of the Blackhawks landing the first pick, the second pick, all the way to 5, because those are their odds. And once it got to like 5, 4, whatever, like once they weren't 5 or 4, I'm like, well, they have better odds of being 1 or 2, because I think the third overall pick was like 7%. Like it was very, or actually it might've been lower than that. It was very low. So I'm like, they must have jumped inside the top 2. And at that point we're like, I don't know, 7-8 minutes away from going live on the air. So like, we know that coming out of the commercial break, whether it's 2 or 1, like I have to be ready to publish my story, feed it out on my social channels, and then like inform my other team that like, hey, this story is up. Can you guys promote it everywhere else? So when when it flipped over to Chicago, like I got Pat Boyle, who's the pre and post host for NBC Sports Chicago. He throws his hands up in the air. They're celebrating. And I immediately go into, I got to get this story up. I got to publish. So like, there was no kind of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening right now. Yeah. It was like immediately into work mode. And then we went live on the air, and we had Kyle Davidson on like right away after he did his ESPN interview. So it was like, I don't think it really hit me until after like I got home that night, because after the show ended, we had to do an emergency podcast. And then it was kind of like I was laying in bed, and like I get home and my brother's still awake because he's like fired up. And it was kind of like, I remember having like a conversation. I'm like, the next 15, 20 years just changed for the Blackhawks, for my job, for the interest from the casual fan with the Blackhawk. Like everything changed because of this one kid. So it was a lot to digest, but it didn't happen until after I finally got home that night and was like, wow, like I can't believe that happened.
And I have to imagine your job from that point forward, between the end of the lottery and the actual NHL draft, was probably pretty easy, because you knew who the first pick was going to be. You didn't have to speculate, well, if it's this guy, if it's that guy. I mean, it's Bedard at that point. So all you have to do is write about Bedard stuff, right?
Yeah. So fun fact. I think back to, I was in Vancouver for the 2019 draft when the Blackhawks jumped from 12 to 3. And in that draft, it was Jack Hughes, Capo Caco. Like those two were for sure. But number 3, it was like, who's going 3? Is it Zegras? It was like 10 to 13 players that could have gone in that range. And between you and me, we're not recording, right? No, I'm kidding. I think I pre-wrote like 6 to 8 players like that the Blackhawks could take in that, or like getting ready that, okay, if the Blackhawks take this guy, I got a story ready. We were walking into the draft. Like I was walking into the arena when I think it was Sam Constantino from Sportsnet had tweeted like signs are pointing to the Blackhawks taking Kirby Dach at number 3. And I see that tweet and I'm like, I don't have a Kirby Dach story ready. He was not one of my 6 to 8 guys that I pre-wrote. So in this case, it was very nice to know that if they got 1, it's Bedard. If they got 2, it's Fantilli. If they got 3, it could be, a handful of players, not like a wide pool of players. So in that way, it was definitely nice to know that I could have some pre-write stories ready, but also kind of like prepare for like what the bigger picture column might look like.
Yeah, I just going back to the end of last season, I was just so ready for a break and just get into the off season. I was so tired. I mean, I'm sure you've heard it at some point on your end in terms of just tank, just finish last, and of course, you know what's at stake. And so I get it, but at the same time, I'm thinking, man, who knows? For the Jackets' luck, they'll finish, third, or I mean, I know they were guaranteed a certain slotting based on where they finished,
Right.
so it lucked out on their end, even to get Fantilli. I mean, that was awesome because people thought it was going to be Carlson. I mean, Carlson, I think it's going to be solid, and there's a lot of different solid prospects, but Fantilli is number one in any other year, most likely. So it's like the best consolation prize. But I was just going back to the very beginning, it's crazy that we're already going into training camp in the next month or so. It just goes so fast.
Yeah, it really does. And that is so true. I when the Hawks drafted Bedard, then we had to kind of go get ready in the media room to wait. And I'm like, hang on a second. And like, I saw that Anaheim was getting ready to pick. And I was like, I got to go see this pick because one of my friends is actually a Columbus fan. And I was like, I just got to see who they take. It's going to be whatever. Or I'm sorry, Anaheim. So I was waiting to see who Anaheim was going to pick. So then Columbus, and they picked Leo Carlson, and I'm like, oh my God. And so it was crazy. Like you said, any other year, Fantilli's probably won. So I see it differently though from Columbus's perspective. I think last season was obviously not ideal, but they basically got a free franchise player in a season that like, well, if you're going to be bad, then be very bad.
Exactly.
Don't be like right outside the playoffs. Yeah. So they really took advantage of, we just got a free franchise player in a year that we thought we were going to make the playoffs. So we will take Adam Fantilli as the consolation prize.
And that's it. I mean, once the season was pretty much over after October, they go 0-3 to start. They had a very tough stretch with Tampa and St. Louis and Carolina. And then they were 3-9, I think, going into November. And we knew that at that point they were pretty much dead.
Yeah.
The Larson tweets were rampant from November going forward, and the goaltending was terrible. And yeah, it is basically just lose. I was just so worried that they were going to lose and then still end up on the outside of the top two. And I do know that when the NHL was doing the lottery, it was already done ahead of time, so it wasn't like it was live,
Right.
Obviously, the slip was not, on weeks, but yeah. Anyway, though, it all worked out.
It's hard to convince the casual fan that, hey, this was pre-recorded, and they're like, yeah, okay, sure.
Exactly.
It's like there's a $1 million firm in Ernst & Young overseeing this. You think their reputation is, they'll be like, yeah, let's rig it. Like, no chance. Right. No chance.
It fuels the conspiracy theorists, but you're right. So obviously last season, as you said, it wasn't really about wins and losses. It was about trying to develop. And it sounds like Luke Richardson in his first year as head coach, a lot of people seem to be feeling good about Luke Richardson, right? And obviously it's basically like you can't really look at the wins and losses, but you're trying to see players developing and are they playing hard and things like that. So what did you learn about Luke and maybe the team's reception based on what you saw and covering them every day? How did you feel that his first year went, considering everything?
Yeah, definitely. I think it really is hard to look at the wins and losses and feel like Luke was kind of exceeded expectations, but he really did. If I go back and dissect every game, win or loss, or let's just do the losses. Like the Hawks were in so many 1-goal games, and a lot of those 1-goal games ended up turning into 2-goal games because like the opponent scored an empty netter. So I think that's exactly what you want during a rebuilding year is competitive losses, right? Like you hate to see a 5-1 loss or a 6-2 loss, right? You want to see 2-1, 3-2, 4-2 with an empty netter, right? Like where you're in it. And it feels like the Blackhawks, I can't remember the stat off the top of my head, but it was like they had like X amount of multi-goal comeback wins in the third period. And it was like, I think it might've been an NHL record or something. It was something along those lines that even when they did fall into a hole, they always found a way to at least claw back, or I should say in most games. So yeah, I think my first impression of Luke was that, okay, he's confident, well-spoken, former player. So he's already like immediately got that respect of like a guy that's played however many years, 20 plus years in the NHL. Sweet tattoos everywhere, so like he's got like that, he can walk into a locker room and command a presence. And then my impression of him at the end of the season was, how did it take this guy so long to get an NHL job? Like, why did he keep getting overlooked by some teams? And so I think the Blackhawks they got a real good one. And I think Kyle Davidson said this when he hired Luke, or when they were going through the coaching process, was, we don't want a stopgap coach. We want a guy that's going to be here for the rebuild, but also be the head coach when the Blackhawks are competitive again. And after year one, I feel fairly confident that Luke is the right guy. Now we see the shelf life of coaches is kind of getting smaller and smaller in today's NHL. So I wonder at what point is his message not going to resonate? I think it's obviously way too early to tell, but I will say this. When the Blackhawks are competitive again, it feels like a lot of the guys that are on the roster right now aren't going to be on the roster then. So his message might actually resonate with the locker room much longer than an original, or than just a normal head coaching lifespan, and that's on a playoff team right now.
Yeah, he came from Montreal, so first crack at it with the Hawks in general. And yeah, I think with Columbus and Brad Larson, he'd been there forever, and then he became the head coach. And they kind of surprised in that first year. But it was kind of, I guess, looking back, it was kind of unsustainable, because they had a lot of, I don't know, they just were never out of games, but it just didn't feel, I don't know. I did have high expectations going in the year too, at least higher expectations in terms of maybe being in the playoff conversation. And then it just fell flat on its,
Yeah.
Babcock will be interesting, because I think he is probably short shelf life as opposed to like the Luke Richardson dynamic, but I feel pretty good about that current situation too. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out for sure.
For sure. I low key am very intrigued by the Babcock hire. Like I wouldn't dismiss that as a bad hire.
Mm-hmm.
I would dismiss that as an intriguing one, because there's a decent chance that locker room responds immediately to him. I think of guys like Peter Laviolette, who with 3 different teams he's taken to the Stanley Cup final in his first year, right? Like Carolina, Philly, and
Nashville.
Missing someone else. Nashville.
I forgot if it was first year, but I knew he had all 3 in there, and at some point.
Yeah. And I'm thinking too, like Gerard Gallant, like he lasted 3 years with the Rangers before
2.
Like his message 2.
Yeah.
Jeez. I mean, yeah, exactly 2. So it's like, I don't know, but Babcock feels like the kind of guy, if you're Columbus and the last coach didn't work, but Torts did, that kind of like, for a short lifespan, it did. Maybe the Columbus does respond to a coach like that, where they respect him so much, and they'll kind of run through a wall for a winning coach like that, who has won before and kind of has that respect. So I know Babcock doesn't come without his warts, but but it is going to be interesting to see how much he has grown from the years off, and just how he tries to connect with today's player.
Yeah. I mean, at first I laughed at that idea when I saw Babcock as a name. I was like, no way. There's no way that's happening. I was kind of banging the drum for Gerard Gallant, but then I kind of backed off that a little bit, because he's kind of been through a lot of teams in a short span recently. I thought the Vegas thing wasn't really his fault, but, then New York came and went pretty fast, and I was looking at Peter Laviolette as well, and just we were kind of doing all the coach stories too, and I realized, the Jackets, their success in their short time frame has come under Ken Hitchcock and John Tortorella, and Hitchcock was huge on Babcock, and it does seem like these guys, the Jackets, Goudreau, and without throwing shots at Larson, there's a lot of veiled, like, we want this accountability. We want someone that's, obviously been there, and it's going to get the standard where it needs to be, and not let things get loose. So there was a lot of sort of veiled shots that, like, okay, they're saying it without saying it, that they want a guy like a Babcock or even that towards structure back in there. So I do think it's should get the best out of them, ideally, at least in a couple of years. And we'll see going forward how that plays out. But it does seem like they're all on the same page, at least.
For sure. I think it's so important for a head coach for the players to totally buy into what the head coach is selling, and trust that the head coach is it like trickles down to the players. Like if the coach puts together a good game plan, holds players accountable, it's like, okay, I will run through a wall for this player. And we saw it with Joel Quenneville here in Chicago. Not to say that Brad Larson didn't have that, but you have to like earn that respect first, because Brad Larson doesn't walk into a locker room and instantly have the respect of the players, right? The players are kind of like, okay, who is this guy? Like, we got to make sure that whatever. And so like, if you don't earn that, it's kind of like Jeremy Colleton here in Chicago after Joel Quenneville left. I know that's such a, you go from the second winningest coach ever to Jeremy Colleton to 30, whatever he was at the time, 33, never coached an NHL game before. So, like, Jeremy really had to earn the respect of guys in that locker room like Seabrook and Keith and Toews and Kane. And it's like, and if you don't ever get it, it's hard for the players to buy in if the leadership group isn't bought in, right? So I think Mike Babcock walking into a locker room, I think that Columbus locker room is going to immediately respect what he's going to bring to the table. The question is, how many years is that before that his style becomes like, okay, it's too much now. But like in the short term, I can definitely see it working out.
Yeah, once it was official, and even when we knew it was going to become official, I was pretty on board. I was like, you know what? They probably need this guy. So it'll be fun to see how it plays. But yeah, as far as the Hawks, obviously pretty busy offseason aside from Bedard. I mean, they bring in, I know they brought in a number of guys for the most part, but like right off the bat, I'm thinking like Nick Foligno, Corey Perry. So, they're bringing in muscle to help guys like Bedard and kind of keep, and obviously the Perry signing is, I know that was not a very popular signing based on his old, where he's come from and everything. But how do you like that? Just the veteran additions. And obviously a guy like Bedard is probably luring in a guy like Nick Foligno, who, let's face it, he was on the Bruins last year, didn't win the Cup. And now he's going from one of the best teams in the league to one of the worst teams in the league. But he wanted to be there too, right? So I guess it was that Bedard effect in some ways.
They did make a lot of interesting moves, acquiring Taylor Hall, Nick Foligno, Corey Perry. I think last year was a lot about sheltering the young players, specifically on the back end. Like we saw them sign Jack Johnson. They've had some other moves on the back end where they wanted to keep their Rockford defensemen like Vlasic, Isaac Phillips in Rockford, because last year was going to be so kind of disastrous. This season, I can see more like, let's give opportunity to the younger players, but let's kind of shelter them too. Like Lucas Reichel is probably going to be full-time player. Bedard is obviously going to be full-time player. Alex Vlasic, I think, is going to be a full-time player. And it's like, how do we put those guys in situations where, even though we're going to give them opportunity to flourish, maybe play top 6 minutes, top pairing minutes, second pairing minutes, how are we surrounding them to make sure that they are in a good spot to do that without feeling like they're in over their head? Yeah. And so I think that's where you see the Taylor Hall acquisition. I actually love that acquisition, because you're basically getting a top 6, whatever. He was playing middle 6 role in Boston, but he's going to play top 6 minutes, probably top line minutes in Chicago, where he's still only 31 years old. And but the best part about that contract, about that acquisition, is his contract. It's only for 2 more years. And same with everyone else that they signed. Foligno 1 year, Perry 1 year. They don't want to spend anywhere beyond 2 years, because that's starting year 3 or whatever it is, year 3 from now, right, is going to be kind of like their go time, their window. So they fill around the edges. The Taylor Hall on the ice, we could talk about that. Like, he's obviously going to play with Bedard, so you want to make sure that Bedard has a winger to play with. The Blackhawks re-signed Athanasiou because he had really good chemistry with Lukas Reichel late in the year. So that's like another 2-year deal where you have Bedard and Hall for 2 years, and then you have Reichel and Athanasiou. And then you look at Foligno and Perry, and you're like, well, those are the veteran leadership guys that are going to make sure that the locker room is tight-knit, is close. They're helping those young guys be molded as players, not just on the ice, but off the ice. So I think there's just a lot of, making sure that the locker room is in a good place, the on-ice product is in a good place, not necessarily for wins and losses purposes, but making sure that the young players are actually playing with, for example, Lukas Reichel. what if he's setting up guys, but he doesn't have a finisher on his line and he's not getting assists. And now it's like, now his confidence is waning because he's like, I only have, whatever. He looks back at the end of the year and he only has 30 points, but it's like, well, he could have 45 if he had a scoring winger, so yeah. I think that's the situation that they want to put their young guys in. And I thought Kyle's done a really good job of making sure that he brings those players in without overspending in term to like impact their financial flexibility down the road.
That's right. Taylor Hall, huge name that I didn't even think about until you mentioned it. And yeah, I mean, the guy was a former MVP not that long ago. It might feel like a long time ago now, but yeah. You said he's still pretty young too. So, and yeah, in Boston, they were so deep that you could put guys, like you said, on the middle six that would be top line almost anywhere else. So you can almost hide out there in Boston as deep as they were.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think Taylor Hall too, he's still got something left in the tank. I know with Boston, he got basically relegated to a third line role, but that's because Boston is loaded. I mean, they had so many great guys. And I think Taylor Hall will also be rejuvenated by the fact that he is going to play top line minutes. He knows he's going to play top line minutes, so he's not kind of looking over his shoulder. And he's going to play with Connor Bedard on the first power play unit. So he's going to get all the opportunity in the world to gain confidence, get his cookies again, and feel like, he could be close to the player that he was prior.
What are your expectations for Bedard? I've heard people, I don't know, I think it was on ESPN or whatever, thinking, 37 goals or whatever the case is. But, and also, I mean, do you think he's going, I mean, this is crazy to even put out there, but based on the hype and everything, is he going to be McDavid part 2? Is he going to be, the next tier below? Or, I mean, can you even, it's really not fair to even put that on him, but just from your perspective, what do you think?
Okay, so I'm like looking this up in real time because I wrote about this in, let's see, May 24th was the timestamp. Basically, I wrote like, can Connor Bedard be a point per game player as a rookie in today's NHL? And I basically went through history and I found that only 37 players in NHL history have averaged at least a point per game in their rookie season. And this is like a minimum of 40 games played. So this is like an actual, like what counts as an NHL full season. Only 5 rookies have done it in the last 27 years. And it's Ovechkin, Crosby, Malkin, McDavid, and oddly, Matthew Barzal. Matthew Barzal was 1.01. It was 85 points in 80. I have 84 games, but that is a typo that I need to fix. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I think, so what I wrote essentially, and then like I put into context, like Patrick Kane, his rookie year in 2007, he had 72 points in 82 games. Okay. So I'm like, all right, 72 points. Can Bedard break that? Well, then I was going back and looking at the numbers as to like what the goal scoring average was and the power play league percentage was in 2007 versus what it was last season. When Kane had 72 points in his rookie year, the scoring average in the league was 2.78. The scoring average last year in the NHL was 3.18, and it was the highest since 1934-90 or 1993-94. And then I was looking at the power play and I'm like, all right, what was the power play success rate when Kane was there? It was 17.75. This past season, it was 22.3, and it was the 9th highest percentage ever. So I'm thinking, I mean, if Kane got 72 in his rookie year when scoring was way down, I don't run it past Bedard to be a point per game player. So like my prediction for Connor is like, I think I'm setting it at 84. Like, I think 84 points is doable. And it's funny because I say that number out loud and I'm like,
right.
I don't know if that's too low or if it's too high, because like it could be like a wide range of outcomes. Like he just shatters everything and becomes like an 100-point player. Probably not going to happen, but it's like 84. It feels like, I mean, I'll set the over under, I guess, at 82, like point per game player. But I'm like, if he stays healthy for all 82 games, like 84, like that's my prediction for now.
Yeah. I mean, I just keep thinking like this is going to be like potentially McDavid part 2 or something because, we saw what he was doing. I know, he was playing last year, junior league, right? Just different stuff, but still it's Bedard. I think it was a couple of years ago. It was kind of this debate. It was like Bedard's probably the number 1 guy. There's also Fantilli, and then Bedard just shot through the last year or so. But I feel like there was kind
Right.
of a debate at one point, like, yeah, it could be Fantilli maybe number one, but then that was like 2 years ago. Obviously, Bedard has just taken over since then. But yeah, I'm kind of expecting big numbers right away, and I think people will be disappointed if he's not putting up like at least 50 in a season first year, right?
Yeah, I think the tricky thing about it is McDavid is 6'2", like his
Yeah,
size. Austin Matthews is big. Bedard's coming in at barely, like not even 5'10".
yeah,
Like he's just under 5'10". So it's
a
like,
little different, yeah.
you know, yeah, it's like, especially as a rookie. But then I look at him and I'm like, dude, his physique is he's he's massive. Like he's so strong. He has tree trunks for legs at 5 foot, barely 5'10". I mean, so that's why it makes it hard. It's like, okay, like when Patrick Kane came into the league, go look at photos of him as a rookie. Like I think he's barely 165. Like he is so small. And I look at Connor and I'm like, he looks like he's been in the league for a couple years, like based on his stature. So that's where it's just like maybe 84 isn't out of the question, or maybe beyond that isn't out of the question, because even though he is undersized,
Yeah.
like he's not underweight. Like if anything, he's a perfect size right now. And so it's not like he has to fill out his frame anymore. It's just like he's kind of like already at his playing weight.
It's funny. I've heard David Kaplan tell this story before about Patrick Kane when he was a rookie and he's about to throw out the first pitch at a Wrigley, and he's up there, I don't know, getting a soda or something, and Cap was like, is your dad who are you, like, are you with your dad or something? He's like, no, I'm throwing out the first pitch. He's like, who are you? He's like, I'm number one pick for the Blackhawks. He's like, oh, didn't even realize who Patrick Kane was at that point. So I was just thinking back, talking about like where a guy like that was in terms of stature and like literal stature, and
Yeah.
how much they, like once Bedard is a couple years into the league, I guess we'll really see what he's doing, obviously based on all the hype and everything. But it does feel like, I know it's not often, but you have Crosby, you have McDavid. When you have the hype around these kinds of players, it seems like they deliver. I don't know if it's more so than other sports, but we'll hear about a guy in another sport, the NBA or whatever, and then for whatever reason that certain guy just didn't really turn into what we thought he was going to turn into. It doesn't seem like there's any doubt about Bedard, though. Just like McDavid, Crosby, other names that have come. Jack Eichel was very good, obviously. Just names we've heard about. So I feel like he's going to be at least the all-star we think he's going to be, if not more.
Yeah, exactly. And just look at interviews of this kid and you're just like, my gosh, he looks so mature. I mean, he talks mature. He's like well beyond his years, and it's not like he looks nervous on camera and you're like, like maybe it's getting to him a little bit. Like he just looks so comfortable in his own skin. And I think with the breaking or the separating point for me was the World Juniors. Like this kid knew that all eyes were going to be on him. He's got the weight of his country on his shoulders. He's the youngest player on his team, and he like shattered record. Like he put up points that nobody else has ever done at that age. And it's just like, my gosh. And for him to continue and then rejoin the Regina Pats and just go on an absolute tear, it's just like, this guy seems so unfazed. So even if he doesn't, let's just say hypothetically, live up to expectations his rookie season, whatever those expectations are, whether it's whatever is over under is 65.5 points by like the betting favorites or whatever, or if it's me saying an 84 points, like whatever those expectations are, he's going to live up to them over the course of his career.
Yeah.
Just because he's so dynamic of a player that we're not going to look back at his career and be like, man, he just underperformed.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's just going to be like his underperforming is still going to be so good. So I just don't think it's ever going to become a hindrance for him. Like he's just going to live up to the expectations, and he's not going to let him bother him.
Oh, and going back to the Foligno addition, I think the Hawks fans are going to like him a lot because he just seems like a guy that's just, that cliche, greasy, like he'll fight, he'll do whatever, he'll score some goals, but mainly he's going to have like that physical presence. So I think he'll be a good addition over there for sure.
Also, yeah, I think we had him. Oh no, we interviewed him over Zoom right after he got acquired with Taylor Hall. They did the Zoom simultaneously with the Blackhawks, and my immediate takeaway after that conversation with Nick Foligno was, as soon as he retires, I think every broadcast team, TNT, ESPN, they should call him to be an analyst, because he is so insightful, and so like such a deep thinker, and he like gets it. Like he has a pulse on like the locker room and what you need to succeed, what where you could be like he is so insightful when it comes to that. So I think he's gonna be a great addition. Probably not on the ice, like he might be more of obviously a bottom six guy, penalty killer, but off the ice, he's gonna be awesome for those young players.
He needs a captain. I mean, he was a captain in Columbus, so he's got that anyway. So that's, I don't think the Hawks are going with a captain this year, are they? Probably not.
I don't think they will.
He'll be the unofficial. He'll be one of the unofficial like leadership guys for sure, though.
Exactly. Yeah, they'll probably go with the 3 alternates, and then I would imagine at some point Bedard's going to get the C.
Darren Pang's coming in. Do you know Darren Pang at all? He's obviously a good personality. I think kind of like a good just addition in terms of where the Hawks are in their new era, with a lot of different faces on the TV side as well, and just him coming in too. Have you gotten to talk with him before much?
Yeah, so we've known, or I shouldn't say we've known each other, but like anytime St. Louis comes to town, like Pang would be around or whatever. So we've kind of met each other in passing, but it was nice to have more of a formal introduction with him when he did get signed to be like our teammate at NBC and at NBC Sports. So I'm looking forward to having deeper conversations with him off camera. So, but he's an awesome addition, and I think he brings that. We see it on TNT and we've seen it on ESPN, all those clips, like when he's saying, "Holy jumping," and like he brings the combination of an old school mentality while also incorporating some new school, while also incorporating some entertainment, right? So I think, especially during probably another rebuilding year, it's going to be nice to have a guy like Darren Pang to kind of guide Hawks fans through it. And then when the Blackhawks are competitive again, it's going to be even better to have a guy like Darren Pang for, potential special runs. So I'm very much looking forward to working with him and just being able to pick his brain, and whether that's, off camera or whatever. I think Hawks fans are really going to enjoy that.
Do you think Jonathan Toews will retire, or where do you think he and even Patrick Kane will end up?
So I would be surprised if Jonathan Toews played again, but I feel like, and at the risk of him potentially announcing something right after this podcast drops, but it feels like Toews is probably going to go into the season without a team and without any formal announcement of something of some sort. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe next summer he decides to hang it up. And maybe he has an idea that he's going to retire, but he doesn't want to totally shut that door, because what if there's an injury to, Colorado or something along during the season, and they call Jonathan Toews and he's like, you know what? I could be a second line center for half a season and try to get one more run out. I don't know. Maybe he just wants to keep that door open, but it feels like to me, next season will be the year where he'll probably make it official and close that door and then move on to whatever's next. Patrick Kane's more interesting because he's made it known that he's not going to sign with a team before training camp or before the season starts. Like he wants his injury to heal. He wants to become fully healthy, and then he wants to check out the hockey landscape, which teams are performing, which are underperforming, and then kind of pick his landing spot. I've had a couple teams in my mind. Like the first team I've had was New Jersey. I feel like New Jersey would be a fun team for him. They play fast. You can play with an American-born player in Jack Hughes, where I think they played together at the Worlds, I want to say. I know Kane and Quinn Hughes played at that Worlds. I can't remember if Jack joined them, but I know Jack Hughes really looks fondly of Patrick Kane because of the U.S. connection. I just don't know financially. Could New Jersey do it? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
The other team that this is going to make Blackhawks fans cringe, but what if he goes to Detroit repairs with Alex DeBrincat? That would probably be more of a 2 or 3 year deal as opposed to like a 1 year, because Detroit's not going to be a Stanley Cup contender. And if Kane wants to be on a Stanley Cup contender, he's probably going to have to sign more of a 1 year deal maybe for a contender at a lower cap hit. But if Detroit's looking at this, like you could play with Alex DeBrincat, we'll give you a 3-year deal. We'll give you a little bit of a higher AAV because, they're looking to kind of make a run at some point in the near future.
Yeah.
Like that wouldn't be a team that surprises me. And that would actually be really convenient for his family that lives in Buffalo, because that is a very short drive from Buffalo to Detroit. So anyway, it's a possibility, I guess, but it's going to be interesting to see where Kane signs and how long he waits before he does actually land with the team.
And even Buffalo is on the rise here. It looks like, at least after last season. I don't know what they're. I mean, I'm sure if they could make that work, I'm sure they would try to. I don't know what their cap situation and all that is, but yeah, you mentioned Buffalo, and then thinking about Detroit, I was thinking about them recently, just yesterday, really. I don't, like you said, I don't think they're a cup contender, but I think they're definitely getting better. But are you kind of, I don't know if you've really thought much about their moves, but are you kind of puzzled by some of the moves they've made? I know the Brinket was a great addition, obviously. We talked about him last year. I think I asked you, should the Hawks build around him or trade him? And they traded him to Ottawa, and now he's in Detroit. But yeah, I don't know. Detroit, I think they're on the up and up, but it's kind of taken its time, it seems.
I'll say this about Detroit, and I don't know if this might be unpopular, but I see like Steve Yzerman getting a lot of flack on social media saying like, what's this Yzer plan? Like, I don't know if whatever. And in my eyes, the one detriment to the plan is that they have not gotten any luck in the lottery. No luck.
Right.
I think they've fallen in every single draft under Steve Yzerman. They have never jumped up. It's always been like, what was the year that they had by far the worst odds, and then they ended up getting the 4th overall pick,
a few years
right?
ago, yeah.
Everything changes if Detroit won the lottery this year and they get Connor Bedard, or if they, a few years ago, they got Jack Hughes or whatever. Everything changes. But because they haven't gotten that lottery luck, Steve Yzerman has had to try to figure out a plan of how do we fill around the edges and win with really good players as opposed to multiple great players as our cornerstones. So that's why you're seeing like Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider and Dylan Larkin. They're bringing Alex DeBrincat. Like all those guys are really good players, but they're not like franchise changers. So I think that's what Steve Yzerman did this summer, where he's like, we just got to add a bunch of good players and try to win that way by having a good team from top to bottom, as opposed to, hey, these horses are going to carry us like the previous Red Wings teams and like the Tampa teams that he's been on with Kucherov and Stamkos or whatever. So I think I don't see Steve Yzerman any differently. I just think they've gotten such poor lottery luck that they have not had that franchise player they haven't been able to land that franchise player, and they're kind of seeing the struggles of how do we fill around the edges without having that generational talent.
Yeah, I think I saw and heard, people were kind of questioning the blue line in terms of people they brought in there, but they have a lot of good forwards too. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, they've gone up a little bit in points every year. So, and he inherited a dumpster fire anyway when Yzerman took over. So yeah, I was just curious, but I feel like he's got a plan. I mean, it's Steve Yzerman, so it's not Tampa Bay yet. He's trying to get them going again.
And if anything, he was the guy that reached for Moritz Seider with the was it 6 or 7? He wasn't expected to go towards the mid to later first round. And when Detroit drafted him, it was in that draft class 2019 where it was a Kirby Doc draft, right? Where it was all those guys that could have gone in that range, and Moritz Seider was not talked about in that range. Yeah. So when Detroit and Steve Yzerman drafted him there, it was kind of like, whoa, like that's a reach. And then turns out he would probably go 2 right now in a redraft because he's that good. So he's done what he's done his best with what he's made do. It's just hard. It's just really hard to rebuild and not land that foundational piece.
I know you were covering Patrick Kane when he went to the Rangers, right? So that was probably kind of weird, right? Seeing him in blue and everything. How was that?
Yeah, that was weird because the Blackhawks were on a road trip. They were on the West Coast, and I was in San Jose. And that was when words started to leak that Kane was likely going to be moved. And we had plans, like NBC had planned to send me to wherever Patrick Kane goes, to cover his first game. And So they ended up pulling me off that road trip early because they just wanted me to be prepared to go to wherever Kane gets traded. And at that point we had an idea that it was going to be the Rangers. So we were kind of following the Rangers schedule. And as soon as the trade got executed, I flew to Philadelphia because they had a road game against the Flyers. And then the very next day, the Rangers played a home game. Yeah. Ironically enough, against the Senators with Alex DeBrincat. So I ended up flying to Philadelphia. When I landed in Philadelphia, we had gotten word that Kane wasn't expected to play. Like he was going to play and he was going to debut in Madison Square Garden. So I flew to Philadelphia. Then I was like, all right, he's not playing. So I'm going to take a train to New York right now. So I took a train to New York and ended up covering his first game the next day. And it was like a very weird experience because I had covered they didn't even have a morning skate because it was the second of a back-to-back, but typically the injured players will skate the morning of. And that morning it was Keandre Miller, who was on that suspension. And then it was Igor Shesterkin, who is typically if you're the game day starter, you'll skate that morning if you didn't play in the first game. So he was scheduled to play in the second game. Seeing Kane come onto the ice in blue, like it was just very weird. And it kind of like took you really had to process it. And then watching the game was even weirder because it was like, I was watching him, like I kind of know his warm-up routine and I was watching him during warm-ups and it was like, his routine got a little disrupted because he's making sure that he doesn't want to disrupt anyone else's routine. So he's trying to like weave through guys. He goes to the face-off circle and he does the stick handling drills and he likes to pass the puck. And he was just like, so it was just very weird. And then it kind of, I guess, got more normal as the season went on. But that day was wild to try to process it all.
I guess, too, was he surprised to see you there? Because, I mean, a familiar face at least, right?
I was there with Ben Pope of the Chicago Sun-Times. And he, this clip, was on Twitter, but he, sat down at his media conference and, Ben and I are in the front row. And so he's like, Chicago boys. So he was nice that I guess he probably appreciated that he saw some familiar faces, but I think he had so much on his mind that it probably just didn't even register. He was probably just so game, morning skate. There's so much to unpack. And, so yeah, but it was funny when he said that. And then after the game, it was nice to talk to him just briefly, just thanking him for what he meant or whatever, just what he, did for me in my career and whatever, but it was it was a nice day.
You've had quite the career already with guys like that, and now you have Bedard coming into it. Or Bedard. I had to think about the name for a minute. Not McDavid, Bedard. Yeah, Connor Bedard.
Yeah, I've really gotten lucky. I told you when the Hawks won the lottery, I came back and I was talking to my brother, and the next day I was talking to my family, and I told them I was my job, knock on wood that I'm still around, but. My job for the next 15, 20 years changed because of this kid. It's just the interest level. And I think the crazy thing about this now, covering Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, it was great. But Bedard is a Canadian born player and he is one of the most hyped prospects ever. So not just Patrick Kane didn't get this much hype going into his draft year. And he was obviously an American born player, but it was still no guarantee that he was going to be one overall and he was going to have this Hall of Fame career. Yeah. With Bedard, it's the entire country of Canada is invested on what this guy does. Every moment they're what is Connor Bedard eating for breakfast? What is he doing at practice? So it's going to be a very unique experience covering a player that not just Blackhawks fans care about, but the entire country of Canada is going to be very invested. So it's I almost feel a responsibility to make sure that I'm covering him and I'm writing good stories about this kid. And fair story, whatever, good or bad. So that people in Canada are making sure that they're getting, all this knowledge from whatever's happening with Bedard in Chicago.
Yeah, I know the one thing about him is apparently he's never had fast food in his life.
Yeah, I saw that. And apparently this started when he was a young kid where he's on this, I think of Tom Brady, how he's when after like 30 years old, that's when he started getting serious about his diet.
Yeah.
Or Patrick Kane, when he started to get towards, when he was 27, 28 years old is when he started working with a new trainer and was doing all these elastic muscle workouts and yet like kind of ditched the weights. And it's like Bedard has been doing this since he was a kid. So it's like, it's crazy that he has the discipline to do that, but also he has the desire. And it's not just, oh, I'm in the NHL, now I got to do these things. It's like he's been laying that groundwork since he was a kid. So that's why he's already like way ahead of schedule than like any other player of his caliber was in years past.
I'm sure you have a personal connection with Rocky Wirtz or any kind of stories that come to mind about him.
Yeah, that's a really unfortunate news and kind of just out of left field. I'll say this about Rocky. He is before his, I don't want to say like his image got tainted a little bit with whatever the off-ice stuff and just the town hall fiasco. But before all that, he was viewed as not just the best owner in hockey, but the best owner in sports because he spent money. He revamped the behind the scenes, like he added a bunch of employees. He was just so good to everyone. And the one thing I appreciated about Rocky was during those cup years, he'd have an owner's suite in the 200 level or whatever, 100 level, wherever it was. But he always sat with the fans in section 119 in a folding chair. And it was just like with fans. And I don't think he ever did that because he wanted the glory and the worship and the praise when things were good. And he's like, yep, this is all me. I did it.
Yeah.
I think he did it out of a place of humility where it's like, we're all in this together. Like this isn't like I'm enjoying this just as much as you guys. And I remember when I went to a game when I think I was in high school and Rocky was around the just going around the concourse and fans were just running up to him wanting to take pictures. And like he took pictures with every single person there without like feeling like he was bigger than just like, you know what I mean? So he was like, he stopped for every picture. He sat with the fans. Like he never wanted the glory or the fame of the Blackhawks winning Stanley Cups. He truly was a great owner as far as I'm going to hire all these people to do their jobs and I'm just going to sit on the sideline and I'm not going to micromanage. Like I'm just going to hire the right people. I'll spend money. I'll do this, yada, yada, to make the organization the best. And so I've always appreciated that about Rocky. And it's really unfortunate because, like 70 is still young, so it's tough in that regard. But on the flip side, I also have a lot of confidence in Danny Wirtz too, moving forward, that he's going to make sure that he carries Rocky's legacy from that regard. And he's not going to be afraid to do the same as his dad did, as far as like spending money and making sure that he wants the best for the Blackhawks organization.
Yeah. We'll close on any bold predictions that you might have for 23-24, the Hawks or otherwise.
Ooh, well, my bold prediction probably would have been the Connor Bedard 84 points, I think.
Right, yeah.
Right?
That qualifies,
Yeah. I'm trying to think of any bold predictions like around the NHL. I think I've picked the Leafs to win the Stanley Cup 3 straight years, so I don't know if I'm going to do that again this year. I think this isn't a bold prediction. Like I think Edmonton wins the cup this year. Okay. So I'll go on record saying I was just looking at some of the moves earlier today of all the significant moves were made in the East, like Erik Karlsson to Pittsburgh, Carolina added Bunting, Dmitry Orlov. Boston's got a new look team. The Rangers added Blake Wheeler, Jonathan Quick. Like all the moves were made in the East. I don't know a team in the West that got significantly better. Like Minnesota, they didn't really do much. Vegas, the defending Cup champions, they didn't do much.
Yeah.
Actually, they didn't do anything. Right. They got rid of Riley Smith because like they're in a cap bind. Like Dallas added Matt Duchene, for a good price, but they also lost Domi, and that, I don't know. It's just, it feels like it's got to be Edmonton's year. And so I'm just going to say Edmonton kind of rolls through the West and they get the winner of the gauntlet that's going to be the East. And I think because they're going to be fresher and because of the history, the playoff disappointments, I think once they get to the Stanley Cup, I just don't know that anyone's going to dethrone McDavid and Draisaitl.
I know that tandem is insane. I don't have to tell you how you've talked with him, I'm sure personally. I know you've talked with McDavid at least, probably both, but You've
Yeah,
seen
I've
him.
more so talked to McDavid about DeBrincat because he played with DeBrincat in the OHL. So every time Edmonton rolls through, I'd always be like, "Hey, Connor, you got a few seconds to talk about DeBrincat?" And I remember one time he joked with me. He's like, "Every time I come to Chicago, I'm asked about DeBrincat." So
It's
like, ah, sorry.
it's got to be kind of fun. I mean, you're used to talking with different people like that, but do you ever think like, wow, I'm talking to Connor McDavid right now about whatever?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
Like the thought crosses my mind, but when I'm doing the interview, it doesn't.
Yeah, of course.
Like maybe there's in the middle of an interview, maybe I'm thinking like, "Holy cow! Like, I can't believe I'm talking to McDavid right now." But it like it doesn't really hit me until like later, where it was like, wow, that was cool. I think the Ovechkin night when he scored his 800th goal at the United Center, I remember I pivoted away. I'm like, I'm going to Washington's locker room because that was history. And like, I'm not covering whatever just happened from the Blackhawks side. And I remember being there and he had all those hats in his stall. And I'm like looking around and there's like 15 media people. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm one of 15 people like right now for this moment.
Yeah.
Like this is going to be shown in like NHL history highlights. And so like, it was very cool that I got to be there. So I think times like that, you're like, man, I cannot believe I was inside that locker room for it. But yeah, like in the moment, you know, if you're interviewing like McDavid or Crosby or whatever it is, it doesn't really hit me until kind of like after,
Right.
you know, or it just, yeah, I don't know. It's weird. I've been doing it a while now.
Yeah.
So I think in the early years I definitely kind of would get starstruck a little bit, but it doesn't really hit me in that way now.
Well, and of course you're a pro. I mean, like you said, you're a pro, so you
debatable.
But you know, it's funny. It's like you know, even with me, like I was like talking to Dan Schulman, and in that moment, I was like, "Damn, I'm talking to Dan Schulman." But then I've talked to him a couple times, and it's like, you know, it's just another person on the other side of the screen. You're on TV and on the radio or whatever, and it's like this is cool. Like for me, like I'm talking with a guy who's like a pro and a legit writer and doing all this stuff. But also, it's like okay, another guy chatting, you know, sports right now. So I know in my own world, I know what you mean in terms of you don't really think about it. It's just kind of a different person on the other side of the screen, or in my case, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, I try to like us having a conversation right now. Like I always want the conversation to feel like we like forget that this thing is recording right now. You know, like I just want to like just two guys talking hockey. And so whenever you can build a rapport with like a player like that, where maybe you're just talking hockey and you're like, you know, man, I wish I was recording that, or, you know, it's like, it was good to kind of just talk. That stuff kind of goes away over time. Like as you build those relationships with those people, and then you're like, okay, this is like a cordial relationship, a professional relationship, as opposed to like me interviewing Connor McDavid, the best player in the world, you know? So it's, you know, it's different.
It was great chatting with you again. You know, keep doing your thing. Awesome to see it. I'm sure I'll see you on TV and hear you on the radio at some point soon. Season's like, you know, like we said, a month away already. So almost a month away. Yeah. So keep crushing it.
Yeah. Thanks, dude. It'll be a fun season. Hopefully it's a little bit better for you in Columbus this year. I think it will be.
Yeah.
But yeah, it should be an interesting season in both Chicago and Columbus, maybe for different reasons, but fun season nonetheless.